Doctors and nurses have ridiculed what have been your why didn't you come in sooner moments. Story from my sil who is a nurse. Young man was brought into the ER. He had a sinus infection that he had let go to the point that it had eaten through the skull and into his brain. She was told that it had started several months before. He didn't want to go to the doctor for it. All it would have needed was 10 days of antibiotic pills. Instead, he was not brought in until he was unconscious and died within a few hours. Had a patient brought in by her son who took care of her. When she arrived to our unit, I performed a skin assessment, took off her socks and found a fallen off gangrenous toe. Seems fake and I wish this was, but it was by far the nastiest thing I've witnessed. Son said he had no idea when his mother's foot became that bad. No words. Children's nurse here. My first week in pediatric ED we had a young girl, 6/7, come in with a really swollen jaw face. Poor girl was unable to move her jaw without intense pain and hadn't been able to eat for several days. Turns out she had only just started cleaning her teeth for the first time ever and managed to develop several abscesses and rotten teeth in the process. To make it worse, her mum told us she was recovering from the same procedures to remove most of her teeth because of almost the same thing. They didn't want to bother the GP as they thought she was just messing about to get out of school. RDD doctor here. A farmer in his 70s reluctantly came in with his wife after falling over outside while wrangling a sheep 1 week earlier. He did not want to be there but had been forced to come by his wife who was worried about him. On examining he was pale, short of breath, and clearly in pain all over the right side of his chest but not wanting to show it. X-ray and blood showed he'd broken loads of ribs, punctured his lung and bled profusely into his chest and was now very anemic. I had a patient come in saying he couldn't see. How long had it been going on? For 5 days. The man had been blind for 5 days and didn't come in because he thought it might be like a cold or something. During the exam when I asked him to move his legs he said, "Oh, I can't do that." I asked how long he'd been unable to move his legs or walk. Wife chimes in about 2 years. Never saw a doctor about it, they just borrowed a friend's wheelchair and kept it rolling. Turned out he'd had multiple strokes with multiple risk factors he never addressed. Given how little insight he appeared to have into the condition, I honestly felt sorry he didn't have insurance, so I'm sure that played a role in him avoiding seeing anyone. Maggots. Whenever it's gotten to the point of maggots it's like 100 alarm bells that this person's living situation is no bueno. Elderly woman fell at home and broke both femurs. Son thought she just needed to rest so he carried her to her bed. She laid there in her own filth for 3 days before anyone called 911. The son lives with her, and there's family next door as well. How? Why? My girlfriend is a care worker and she recently told me that she slipped off a patient's slippers and remarked, "I didn't know you had lost your toes," to which the patient responded, "Well, I had until you took the slipper off, dear." Sounds like something from a grim sketch show. God bless anyone who can do jobs like that. I've seen a few over the years, and they generally fall into the category of a if it's not diagnosed then I can't have it, or I didn't think it was that bad. As a medical student I remember an older lady that had a breast that was necrotic and falling off. It had been progressing over the last several years, but if she didn't get diagnosed with breast cancer, then she couldn't have it. In the other category I've seen a few cases of Fernie's gangrene, pretty much obese, male diabetics that had a pimple sore that started in the pubic region. By the time they come to the hospital it's a raging infection where the treatment is basically to cut away everything in the pubic groin region down to the muscle layer. That little sore didn't seem like much at first. My dad is the one that wouldn't go in. He got a sore in the crease on the bottom of his second toe, the one next to the big toe. So it would be the piggy that stayed home and just kept ignoring it. He would go with his wife to her nail place and have his toenails trimmed, and I think that's where the infection probably got in when they soaked his feet. He blew it off for a couple of weeks until the wife made him see the doc. It's a good thing she did. The infection had gotten into the bone, so they had to snip his toe off to the first knuckle to catch it before it went any further. The doc said had he waited any longer, he could have lost the entire foot. He's lucky to just have a stubby piggy and not a stubby leg. My cousin is a pathologist assistant and was telling me how she had to dissect a testicle that was 11 pounds. Turns out it was testicular cancer. Not a doctor, hospital staff. But my grandpa ended up passing away because he waited too long before going to the hospital. This was about 17 years ago. He was tending to one of his mules when something spooked it and he got kicked in the gut. He was in a lot of pain, could barely move due to the abdominal pain, so decided to take it easy and lounge on the couch for a week. He refused to go to be taken to the hospital. Unfortunately, that mule kick ruptured an unknown tumor in his intestines. The doc said it was huge, like volleyball size huge, and he may have survived if he came in sooner. By the time we got him to the hospital, he had a severe case of gangrene. His leg needed to be amputated within a day of him being there. He passed away a week later. Once had an older lady call in wanting a prescription for pain meds because she was sure she had shingles. Said her neighbor had them and she was sure that's what it was. She hadn't been in for an exam in almost 2 years. So the doctor asked that she come in to be evaluated before a prescription could be given. She refused and called again the next day asking for a prescription. This went on all week. Her calling for pain meds. The doctor asking her to come in to be seen. She finally agreed to make an appointment. It wasn't shingles. It was a skin ulceration from advanced breast cancer, We once had a patient who went to emergency for abdominal pain and they discovered a fungating breast wound. Don't image search that she'd had for 2 years and hadn't gotten medical attention for. A biopsy and a PET scan later she was diagnosed with breast cancer with extensive liver, lung and bone mets. This was also in Australia, so it wasn't a money issue, just sad. I work in orthopedics. A very common occurrence is a patient is told to follow up within the week. We like to see fractures between 5 and 7 days, and the patient will call on the 6th day and say I broke something and need to be seen tomorrow. This is frustrating because we very rarely have the ability to get a patient in next day, and if they had called the day of or the day after then we definitely could have gotten them seen. But my number one "why didn't you come in sooner" moment was getting a call from a patient who had broken their forearm 2 months ago and never followed up. I got them scheduled. They no-showed their appointment. Rescheduled. They no-showed. Second reschedule. They arrive with a very obvious deformity to their arm due to the fracture healing incorrectly. If they had just come in, it wouldn't have been an issue at all. Blows my mind that they went almost 3 months without care. Obligatory not a doctor. I was sitting in a hostel with an emergency nurse and an emergency doctor that had just found out that while they worked on different continents, they did similar work. We were happily chatting along and this older guy walks in. He overhears that they're in the medical field and comes up to see if he can ask a question. He shows them his leg. That's got large black spots on it everywhere below the knee. Both the nurse and the doctor look at it and immediately go, "You have to go see emergency services. That leg is necrotic. You'll lose the leg if not your life." And the guy goes, "That's what my doctor back home said too. But the leg feels fine. I'd know if it was dying." You are wrong. Besides, I'm not gonna ruin my vacation by seeking medical treatment. Double quote. Which left me wondering why he asked in the first place. He goes to sit at the bar and over the course of the evening both the nurse and the doctor leave the table to try to get this guy to understand that he may not have 10 days until he's back home. That he needs to have this looked at now without success. Pretty sure that if that guy made it to a hospital, they asked themselves that question. I'm a doctor and while working in and we had an older chap, possibly in his 70s, who several days prior to presentation had a sudden onset severe chest pain and vomiting while loading the car with shopping. He ignored it and struggled home. The next day he started to lose the use of both legs and by the time he came to hospital had been crawling around his house for several days because he thought it would get better. He had had a major cardiac event, developed a clot which his heart had pumped out. It went down his body, broke in half and blocked off the blood supply to both legs. He literally had dead legs. I don't know what ended up happening to him, but there was no way to save the legs and I reckon the outcome was very poor, if not fatal. Edit because there is a lot of USA assumption going on. This isn't the UK where healthcare is free at point of access, so debt is not a contributing concern for our patients. Guy came in with a dead leg, waited until it turned black and then decided to head to the ER. They tried an angiogram to open up blood flow but it was way late for that. Guy had several clots in his lungs and legs. Undiagnosed atrial fibrillation. He couldn't believe we were going to amputate. Kept asking me what else I could do. Go back in time a week ago and come in. Kinda around when it turned blue. Not a doctor, but was this patient once. My sophomore year of college I started drinking coffee, and, as college students can be wont to do, I drank a lot of it. One evening, during midterms week, I get a bad headache. So I drink some coffee and settle in to churn out a few hours of work. My headache goes away, but I start noticing tingling and numbness in the right side of my body. It eventually gets bad enough that I can feel the line down my face where the tingling ends. My whole right side is totally numb. But, I think, it's midterms week, and I probably just need to sleep it off and it'll be fine, right? So I go to bed, wake up for my 8 AM, and the numbness is all worse. Eventually, at like 10 AM, I finally asked a friend to drive me to the ER. The ER doctor was horrified that I had ignored a very obvious sign of a stroke for at least 12 hours. It ended up being a complex migraine brought on by, essentially, a caffeine overdose and sleep deprivation. I adjusted parts of my lifestyle, including monitoring my coffee intake, and haven't had a repeat episode. Oh, so many stories here. We can start with a gentleman in his 70s who was diagnosed with diabetes. His doctor had instructed him that it's important for him to wear socks and supportive shoes throughout the day. So this guy decides that meant wear the same pair of socks for weeks and never take them off. He had showered, slept, and carried on in the same pair of socks for weeks. He came to the ER because there was blood oozing through his sock and there was pain under there. Take the sock off. He's got a diabetic ulcer that had opened and was full of maggots. Not a pretty sight. We clarified those instructions pretty quickly. Nurse here. I work in a very rural hospital, and we have a patient population that seems to avoid the hospital at all costs. I have had so many, usually related to diabetics with foot sores almost always resulting in amputation of a toe, or more. However, my favorite was an elderly farmer who came in with chest pain that wouldn't go away, as he put it. When we asked him if he had it before, he had said that he had been having chest pain on and off for years, but it would typically go away after he grabbed his electric fence. Apparently, the first time he had the pain he was standing out near an electric fence on his farm, and he reached out to steady himself and accidentally grabbed the electric fence, which shocked him, and made the pain go away. So after that, whenever he would have the pain, he just went and grabbed the fence and it made him feel better. He had literally been cardioverting himself for years. He was fixed up and sent on his way, but we all still chuckle about it now and then because he was so nonchalant about it. Nad, but the patient a few years ago. I had a boil on my butt that I thought was MR. Tough guy, I could walk it off. No you can't. I was in so much pain. Couldn't sit or stand near the end. I could only limp along or lay down in an extremely convoluted position. I went over 2 weeks before it got so bad I couldn't stand it anymore. I finally went to the ER to get it drained and the doctors they were not really happy with me when I told them that I'll let this try go away with Epsom salt baths or my own wishful thinking. For my stubbornness I earned myself a staph infection and a very upset doctor who let me know in no uncertain terms I brought this upon myself. This has happened a few times, actually, but I had a gal come in on Monday after being discharged from the hospital Friday after giving birth. So basically, we tell ladies to avoid intercourse until a doctor clears you. And well, her spouse kept insisting that Friday night she caved and let him go to town. He wound up tearing some stitches that were placed and bleeding like a stuck hog all weekend long. Came into our clinic, blew in the lips and fingers, and her hemoglobin was 4. Normal should be 12-15. She didn't wanna be a bother, so she waited until she started feeling dizzy all the time. She got another trip to the hospital for transfusion and repair for that. But, like I said, this isn't the first time I've seen that. So for the love of God, if homeboy is begging for it after you just had a baby, maybe he needs a lesson in self-control and a bottle of moisturizer. Years ago as a nursing assistant on an oncology floor we had a guy admitted because he had had an erection for several days and had lost the ability to pee. His bladder was close to bursting and his poor junk was, think microwave hot dog, really bad. But none of that was as interesting as the fact that this guy had untreated skin cancer on his nose for several years that had over time become infected. developed MRSA, and spread across his face. He had no nose, no cheek, and no eye on one side of his face, and was starting to lose his other eye. You could see part of his ducking skull. I don't know why he chose to leave it untreated, and I have no idea how long it took to get that bad. But I will never ever forget the smell and texture of his rotting face. On the upside, we were eventually able to convince him to have reconstructive surgery. He ended up getting a skin graft that covered up his eye, nose and cheek. So, if you ever meet a very grumpy dude with nothing but a mouth and one eye, know that this is way better than the alternative. Former medic here. Called to a patient who had cut their leg while chopping wood about a week prior and now it was really itchy. Old gentleman. Didn't drive. Lived alone. Got to his house. Unwrapped the ungodly swollen leg to find that he'd tried to superglue the wound closed and maggots had commenced to growing inside. The itching he was feeling was the writhing maggots under his skin. Not me, but my brother is an EMT for a warehouse. He recently had a guy come to his station saying something was wrong with his toe. So he asks him to take off his shoe, which he does. My brother was about to ask him to take off the bandage around his big toe before he realizes that that wasn't a bandage. It was his skin. Apparently, this guy dropped a 20-pound tote on his toe a week earlier and had been showing up at work anyway. They sent him to the doctor. The doctor sent him to the ER. Diagnosis came back as a tissue infection as well as osteomyelitis, a bone infection. But wait, there's more. The guy come back from the ER and tells him that he doesn't want to go through the ER doctor and would rather go through his own insurance. My brother explained to him as best as he could that, as it stood, he was already likely going to lose his toe, and if he waited any longer to get it treated, he ran the risk of losing his entire leg. Not sure what happened after that. I just hope he got the point. Not a doctor or nurse but the patient. I went into my doctor with some back pain and also brought up that my leg was swollen. The doctor I saw said it was probably just swelling due to sodium intake. A week later, the pressure and pain in my leg was so bad that it hurt to walk. I called off of work and had my husband take me back into the doctor. The doctor took one look and told me to get to the hospital immediately. He suspected I had a blood clot. I ended up having a massive blood clot from my hip to my knee and pulmonary emboli. I was transferred to another hospital for surgery and stayed in the ICU. Had I waited any longer, I would have died. This happens all the time. People have a big stroke at home and can't move an entire side of the body. They wait several days thinking it's a flu or something. Nope, not the flu. Just a large clot in the brain that could have been reversed if you came in right away. Nurse here had a diabetic who couldn't afford to fill his oil tank during the winter. He was young too, early 40s. Anywho, had neuropathy in his feet so couldn't feel that they were becoming frostbitten. He had also been wearing his winter boots 24/7 for warmth. His sister went to check on him one day after she realized his phone was shut off by. She brought him in because she thought he seemed off. The doc asked me to take his boots off. One of his toes came off with the boot. No joke. He ended up having a below-the-knee amputation to one leg and a transmetatarsal amputation to the other and on IV antibiotics for weeks. Diabetics. This is why us nurses always preach check your feet. A colleague of mine removed a diabetic patient's sock and their toes came off inside it. I'm a PA in ortho, working in hand surgery at the time. Patient says he had a wrist replacement a number of years ago and has a hole in his wrist. I figure he has a small draining sinus. He comes in. First I see his x-rays which looks like he has a massive contracture. Not ideal, but not uncommon. He has coband on his wrist which I peel off to see a 3 by 6 centimeters hole in his wrist opening directly on his implanted wrist replacement. Specifically on the poly insert that allows the two portions of the implants to glide on one another. He said he noticed the hole about 4 years ago and when it got so large he finally decided to see someone. Bonus. NSFW link. When I was training to be a nurse, I got paired with a play specialist for a few weeks. A mum came into R&D with a little boy of about 4 or 5. Doc requested we come and entertain distract little man while he examined him and left it at that. He was happy, chatty and a picture of health from the shoulders up. His belly however looked like he was expecting very soon. This was a shock to both me and the other girl who had taken the usual toys. We had little baskets for each of us to take where needed. We trailed this little guy while he had a multitude of tests and he was extremely brave, letting the docs do what they had to. Mum was asked how long it had been going on and she said 3 months. He had a tumor and the surgeons managed to remove it, but the poor kid was so embarrassed after surgery because he had saggy skin and stretch marks. He often plays on my mind. Even more so since having a kid of my own. Hope he's doing okay now. This happens all the time because healthcare is a financial decision in America. Wow, I don't know why I'm reading these, but I just keep reading them. I was this patient lol. When I was 18 I went to the ER for chest pain. It was the most painful thing I had ever felt. Seriously, I felt like the guy from Alien. A few hours later the ER doctor released me, telling me I had acid reflux and would be fine. Over the next 2 years this was a continuing problem. Once a month, and seriously, it was that predictable. First Saturday night of every month, I would get this terrible chest pain. No amount of antacid medicine would help, from over-the-counter medications to prescription. I tried not eating that day, drinking milk, sitting straight up all night. Nothing helped. Finally, after I literally passed out from the pain one time in front of my mom, she convinced me to see a doctor again. The doctor, the first female doctor I had seen, by the way, sent me in for a gallbladder ultrasound on a hunch and they discovered well over 100 stones in it. Cue emergency surgery. Dumbfounded surgeon. And a doctor amazed I had been passing gallstones for 2 years on the regular. Obligatory not a doctor, but I have a story about myself. I got really sick really fast, but didn't realize it. I had stage 4 Burkitt's leukemia, CNS positive, which is very important to know. Less than 100 people my age will get that cancer each year in the USA, so pretty uncommon. Anyway, I got super sick just over a year ago. And just happened to have a doctor's appointment scheduled. Went to the appointment and felt like absolute trash. Sweaty, hot, lethargic, lightheaded, terrible heartburn, and just tired. Also could barely breathe. My dad, who was driving me to the appointment, had to wake me up and I remember him saying, "Get up, fatus. We have a doctor's appointment to get to. You better be ducking sick." In his defense, he had no idea and neither did I just how sick I was. As 2 weeks before I was fine, working in South Carolina on a construction job. So we get to the appointment and I get blood work and an ultrasound of my chest cavity. The doctor saw the ultrasound photos and was stunned. Then saw my blood work and told me to get the duck back to the hospital, as we left to go home and would hear the results later. Doctor saw 7 tumors on my liver, the biggest on the size of a grapefruit and the second largest the size of a baseball. And then saw my blood work was trashed. Diagnosed me with cancer and said it was a miracle I was awake, let alone walking and cracking jokes. Only found out later that Burkitt's cell can double in size within 24-48 hours. Doc wondered why I hadn't had problems with my monster tumors before since I only scheduled the appointment to fix heartburn. TLDR, I made a doctor's appointment for heartburn. Got diagnosed with super cancer. Had a guy show up in my clinic one day with a complaint of finger swelling. So as the story went, his finger got swollen and painful about a week prior. Just got worse and worse. And about 3 days prior to coming, a hole opened up in the tip of his finger. This is where I, personally, would have noped right to the office. So come the day of the visit, he says, "By the way, I pulled something out of the hole in my finger yesterday with a pair of tweezers. No idea what it is." I asked him if he took a picture or kept it, and he produced a tissue from his shirt pocket. It was his distal phalanx, read, last bone in the finger. The bone had gotten infected and the body did its thing and basically tried to eject what was now a hot foreign body. The guy pulled his fingertip out of his fingertip. A better magic trick I have not since seen. I'm that person though. I'm embarrassed to admit it, but my daughter's teeth were rotting due to a heart condition. We had to save for months for the surgery to extract the teeth. We are in US and it was seen as an optional surgery, not covered by insurance, so it was close to $7,000. When they brought the extracted teeth to us, they were so rotten you could see the root. I cried thinking about how painful it was for her to eat. We had always brushed but a mix of antibiotics and pain medications from an early age, 6 months, made her teeth basically mush mush. It was horribly embarrassing, and explaining to the doctor and dentist that we knew, but didn't have the money. They just looked at us like we were horrible parents.